Welcome, dear listener, to another journey into the forgotten corners of our past. Tonight, we'll step away from the comfort of our modern world and venture into an era where faith and fear walked hand in hand through narrow cobblestone streets, where the promise of salvation could be purchased with silver coins, and where the line between the sacred and the fraudulent was far thinner than we might imagine. As you settle into your comfortable surroundings, perhaps pulling a soft blanket closer or adjusting your pillow, consider how different your evening might be if you lived 7 centuries ago. The electric lights that illuminate your space, the central heating that keeps you warm, even the simple certainty that tomorrow will bring another peaceful day. None of these comforts existed for the people whose stories we'll explore tonight. Instead, imagine a world where darkness fell absolutely when the sun set, where winter cold could mean the difference between life and death, and where the promise of eternal damnation felt as real and immediate as the hunger in your belly or the aches in your bones. This was the world of the 14th century, a time when hope itself had become a commodity to be bought and sold. Our journey tonight will take us through 4 distinct yet interconnected stories that reveal the complex tapestry of medieval life. We'll begin with an experience that perfectly captures the desperate spiritual marketplace of the era, the extraordinary phenomenon of priests selling tickets for visitors to witness the souls trapped in purgatory. From there, we'll follow the dramatic rise and tragic fall of Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, whose story illuminates the dangerous intersection of wealth, power, and religious authority. Our third stop will be perhaps the strangest tale of all, the mysterious dancing plague that gripped the city of Strasbourg in 1518, when hundreds of people found themselves unable to stop moving in a frenzy that baffled physicians and terrified entire communities. Finally, we'll peer behind the carefully guarded walls of medieval monasteries to discover the hidden luxury enjoyed by abbots who preached poverty while living like princes. Each of these stories reveals something essential about the medieval world, a time when the spiritual and material realms were so intertwined that it's difficult to separate faith from commerce, devotion from manipulation, genuine mystery from calculated deception. These weren't simpler times, as we sometimes imagine, but rather an era of extraordinary complexity where ordinary people navigated a world that could be both miraculous and terrifying, often within the same day. As we embark on this exploration, let the rhythm of these ancient stories carry you gently through the night. Allow yourself to drift between past and present, between the harsh realities of medieval life and the soft comfort of your modern evening. The voices of these long-dead pilgrims, knights, dancers, and monks have much to teach us about the enduring human struggles with hope, power, mystery, and the eternal quest for meaning in an uncertain world. You wake before dawn in your cramped quarters at the monastery guest house, your stomach gnawing with hunger that you've learned to ignore. The wooden floor beneath your straw mattress creaks with every movement, and the November cold seeps through gaps in the stone walls like invisible fingers reaching for your bones. You've traveled 3 weeks to reach this place, spending your family's grain money on what the traveling friar promised would be salvation itself, a chance to witness the souls trapped in purgatory and purchase their relief with your prayers and offerings. The bell tower chimes, its bronze voice cutting through the pre-dawn silence, and you rise with dozens of other pilgrims, each clutching their precious parchment tickets. These small, hand-inked documents cost you more than your father earns in 2 months of backbreaking labor in the fields, but Father Benedict assured you they guarantee passage to witness the souls in purgatory, a privilege that will reduce your own time in those cleansing flames by exactly 7 years and 40 days. The mathematics of salvation, it seems, can be calculated with remarkable precision. Your feet ache in your thin-soled shoes as you shuffle through the monastery corridors with the crowd. The stone walls weep with condensation, and the air hangs thick with incense, unwashed bodies, and something else, fear mixed with desperate hope, a scent that seems to cling to places where people come seeking miracles they cannot afford. You clutch your ticket tighter, feeling the rough parchment between your calloused fingers. The Latin words mean nothing to you, but the priest's seal pressed into red wax gives you comfort, like a tangible piece of divine authority you can hold in your hand. The procession moves slowly through corridors lit by flickering candles that cast dancing shadows on ancient walls. The flames create an hypnotic rhythm of light and darkness that seems to mirror the uncertainty in your heart. Your neighbor, a baker's widow who sold her wedding ring to be here, whispers prayers in a dialect you don't recognize. Her words blend with the soft shuffle of feet and the occasional cough that echoes off stone surfaces. Behind you, a merchant coughs wetly, the same cough that's plagued half the pilgrims since crossing the mountain pass. You try not to think about the stories of plague following such gatherings, of how sickness spreads when desperate people crowd together in close spaces. As you descend stone steps worn smooth by centuries of feet, the air grows colder and carries an odd, sweet scent that makes your stomach flutter with unease. Father Benedict appears at the bottom of the stairs, his face gaunt, but his eyes bright with an intensity that makes you uncomfortable. He wears robes of fine wool while you shiver in your patched tunic, and his well-fed appearance contrasts sharply with your own hollow cheeks and the obvious signs of hunger that mark most of the pilgrims around you. Brothers and sisters in Christ. His voice echoes off the stone walls with practiced authority. You are about to witness what few mortals have seen, the very souls trapped between heaven and hell, crying out for your prayers and offerings. He gestures to a heavy wooden door behind him, its iron hinges black with age and moisture. The metal gleams dully in the torchlight, and you can hear sounds from beyond, faint moaning that might be wind through stone passages or something far more disturbing. Your tickets grant you this sacred privilege, but remember, what you see must move you to greater generosity. The soul's torment can only be eased by your continued donations to our holy work. The door opens with a groan that seems to come from the earth itself, a sound so deep and resonant that you feel it in your chest. You're pushed forward by the crowd, and the smell hits you like a physical blow, sulfur, decay, and something burning that makes your eyes water and your throat close. The chamber beyond is lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on rough stone walls carved from living rock. In the flickering light, you see them, shapes moving behind iron bars set into alcoves, forms that seem to writhe and reach in the uncertain illumination. Your heart pounds as you strain to see more clearly, squinting through the smoke and trying to make sense of what lies before you. The shapes moan and writhe, their voices echoing in languages you can't understand. Sometimes Latin, sometimes sounds that don't seem to form words at all. One reaches through the bars toward you, a pale arm that seems almost translucent in the torchlight, fingers grasping at air with desperate urgency. You want to look away, but Father Benedict's assistant pushes you closer, whispering that your proximity increases the spiritual benefit and that the soul's hunger for the presence of the living. See how they suffer, Father Benedict intones, his voice taking on a theatrical quality that somehow makes the scene both more dramatic and less convincing. These souls burn with invisible fire, feeling every moment the weight of their earthly sins. The flames that cleanse them cause agony beyond mortal comprehension, yet this purification is necessary for their eventual salvation. But your prayers and your continued donations can ease their torment and hasten their journey to paradise. Who among you will pledge another silver piece for their relief? You fumble for your purse, knowing it contains only 3 copper coins and a piece of bread that represents your meal for the journey home. Around you, other pilgrims sob and throw whatever money they have toward the alcoves. The shapes behind the bars respond with renewed moaning, reaching out as if grasping for the offerings with desperate gratitude. The sound of coins hitting stone mingles with cries of spiritual anguish and the whispered prayers of believers convinced they're witnessing divine truth. But something bothers you about the scene, a nagging doubt that grows stronger the longer you observe. The souls seem to move in patterns, as if following some unspoken choreography rather than expressing genuine torment. When one reaches toward you, you catch a glimpse of very mortal flesh beneath what appears to be ash or pale powder, skin that looks cold and clammy rather than burned by supernatural fire. The sulfur smell, you realize with growing unease, comes not from hellfire, but from burning herbs in hidden braziers strategically placed to create the appropriate atmosphere. The mysterious languages resolve themselves into theatrical gibberish when you listen closely enough to detect the repetitive patterns. Your stomach turns as understanding dawns with horrible clarity. The hollow-eyed souls are actors, likely destitute locals paid in bread and ale to play their parts in this elaborate performance. The invisible flames are nothing more than the power of suggestion and carefully placed torches designed to create dramatic lighting effects. The entire spectacle is an elaborate fraud, meticulously designed to extract money from pilgrims like yourself who can least afford it but are most desperate for the hope it promises to provide. Yet you say nothing, swallowing your growing outrage and disbelief. To speak would be to challenge the church itself, and the penalties for such blasphemy are severe: excommunication at minimum, possibly charges of heresy that could result in public humiliation or worse. Instead, you drop your last 2 copper coins through the bars, watching as one of the souls snatches them up with practiced efficiency. The metal disappears somewhere beneath the theatrical rags and ash, likely into a hidden pouch designed for just this purpose. The tour continues for what feels like hours, though the absence of windows makes it impossible to track the passage of time. Father Benedict leads you through chamber after chamber, each containing different categories of souls. Murderers here, their moans deeper and more agonized. Adulterers there, their cries taking on notes of shame and longing. Usurers in a special section where the moaning is particularly pitiful and the reaching hands seem to grasp specifically for coins rather than general mercy. At each stop, he explains how specific donations can help specific types of sinners, creating a complex economy of spiritual commerce that would impress any merchant. Your feet are numb with cold by the time you emerge into daylight, blinking in the pale sunshine that seems harsh after the carefully controlled illumination of the chambers below. The other pilgrims seem dazed, some weeping openly at what they believe they've witnessed, others chattering excitedly about the profound spiritual experience they've just undergone. The widow who stood beside you earlier is counting out more coins, planning to purchase additional prayers for her dead husband. She doesn't seem to notice that her spiritual guide, one of Father Benedict's assistants, eyes her purse with undisguised greed, already calculating how much more money might be extracted from her obvious devotion and grief. The afternoon brings more opportunities to spend money you don't have on spiritual benefits of increasingly dubious value. Holy water blessed by proximity to the suffering souls costs 6 copper pieces per vial, presented in small glass containers that catch the light beautifully but hold barely a mouthful of liquid. Candles that will burn continuously for the dead are priced according to their size and the quality of their wax, with the most expensive versions promising to burn for exactly as long as needed to secure a soul's release from purgatorial torment. Parchment prayers written in Latin and sealed with holy wax promise to reduce purgatorial suffering by days, weeks, or even months, depending on how much you pay and how elaborate the calligraphy. You watch with growing horror as families bankrupt themselves, convinced they're purchasing salvation for loved ones who may or may not need such intervention. A farmer trades his horse, his primary means of working his land, for a promise that his father's soul will be released from purgatory within the year. A merchant's wife sells her jewelry to buy prayers for children who died in infancy, tears streaming down her face as she hands over pieces that represented her family's security. Each transaction is recorded carefully in ledgers by monks who seem far more concerned with earthly accounting than heavenly rewards, their ink-stained fingers moving with the precision of experienced bookkeepers. As evening falls, you're herded into the monastery's great hall for a feast, another paid experience, of course, because spiritual sustenance apparently requires material payment as well. The bread is stale, the ale watered down to stretch further, and the meat tough and sparse, clearly the cheapest cuts available rather than the abundant provisions suggested by the name feast. Yet you're told this humble meal mirrors the Last Supper and carries spiritual significance worth every copper piece it costs, transforming necessity into sacrament through the power of creative interpretation. Father Benedict speaks throughout the meal, his voice growing more fervent as he describes the urgent need for ongoing support. The monastery, he explains with convincing passion, requires constant funding to maintain its sacred work of housing purgatorial souls. The actors, though he doesn't call them that, referring instead to those blessed with the ability to perceive and channel spiritual suffering, need food and shelter to continue their holy performance. The torches, the incense, the very stones of the chambers must be blessed and maintained through generous donations, creating an ongoing expense that justifies perpetual fundraising. You realize with growing horror that this isn't a one-time exchange, but the beginning of a lifelong financial relationship designed to extract maximum value from your spiritual anxiety. Father Benedict speaks knowingly of pilgrims who return year after year, bringing friends and family members to share the profound experience. He mentions wealthy patrons who've endowed entire chambers, ensuring their loved ones receive premium purgatorial accommodations complete with enhanced spiritual services and accelerated processing times. The language of salvation has become indistinguishable from the vocabulary of commerce. The night brings little rest in accommodations that would be generous only by comparison to sleeping outdoors. You're crowded into a dormitory with dozens of other pilgrims, sleeping on straw that smells of previous occupants and listening to a symphony of human misery, snoring, coughing, and muttered prayers that continue long into the night. Through thin walls, you hear the sounds of monks counting the day's takings, their voices cheerful as they tally silver pieces and make plans for expanding their operation to accommodate growing demand for purgatorial tourism. Morning brings one final opportunity to empty your pockets before the return journey begins. A special sunrise ceremony promises to multiply the effectiveness of any offerings made while the sun breaks the horizon, creating a brief window of enhanced spiritual potency that can dramatically increase the value of your investment. You watch as your fellow pilgrims, exhausted and spiritually drained, nevertheless dig deep for these final purchases. Some borrow money from others, creating debts that will follow them home and extend the financial impact of their pilgrimage far beyond the immediate expenses. As you finally prepare to leave, Father Benedict offers you a special privilege that feels more like a threat than an opportunity: the chance to purchase your own family's place on the monastery's ongoing prayer list. For just 20 silver pieces paid annually, he assures you that your deceased relatives will receive daily intercessions that will significantly reduce their purgatorial sentences. The offer comes with an ornate certificate suitable for display and a promise that your investment will continue working even after your own death, creating a spiritual legacy that transcends mortal limitations. You decline, claiming poverty that needs no pretense, and Father Benedict's expression grows cold with disapproval that seems distinctly earthly in nature. He speaks of the terrible consequences of spiritual stinginess, the way souls suffer when the living fail to support them adequately. His words follow you as you gather your few possessions and join the group of departing pilgrims, creating a burden of guilt designed to encourage future donations even as you physically leave the premises. The journey home takes longer than your arrival, partly because several pilgrims have fallen ill from poor food and cramped conditions, but mostly because the enthusiasm that carried you here has been replaced by a growing sense of betrayal that weighs heavier than any physical burden. You've spent money your family desperately needed on an elaborate theatrical performance designed to exploit your deepest fears and hopes, trading tangible resources for intangible promises that may have no substance beyond the conviction of those who purchased them. Yet you can't speak of your suspicions, even to fellow pilgrims who might share your doubts. The Church's authority is absolute, and questioning its practices could result in accusations of heresy that would destroy your life and endanger your family. Instead, you must return home and explain to your hungry children why their sacrifice has purchased nothing more than memories of painted actors writhing behind iron bars and the lingering scent of theatrical sulfur. The worst part isn't the financial loss, devastating though it is to a family that survives on the margins of subsistence. The true damage is the spiritual confusion that lingers long after you return to your village, poisoning the very faith that drove you to make the pilgrimage in the first place. The experience has shaken your belief not in God, but in those who claim to speak for Him with such authority and conviction. You find yourself questioning other church practices, wondering what else might be performance rather than sacred truth, and these doubts feel dangerous, even blasphemous. Yet you can't shake them no matter how fervently you pray. Years later, when other pilgrimage opportunities arise and traveling friars visit your village with promises of spiritual advancement, you make excuses and find reasons to avoid participation. You've learned that salvation can't be purchased with coins dropped through iron bars, that the boundary between the sacred and the fraudulent is thinner than you ever imagined possible. The memory of those cold stone chambers and theatrical moans serves as a permanent reminder that human greed can corrupt even the most sacred promises, transforming desperate hope into profitable entertainment. Your neighbors still speak of that monastery with reverence, and some plan their own pilgrimages based on your account of the profound spiritual experience available there. You say nothing, knowing that your silence makes you complicit in the ongoing deception, but unable to risk the consequences of speaking truth to those who profit from maintaining the illusion. The tickets to see Purgatory continue to be sold, and desperate souls continue to buy them, trading earthly poverty for the promise of spiritual wealth that exists only in the imagination of clever priests and the performance skills of paid actors who have learned to monetize suffering with remarkable efficiency. As our medieval pilgrims made their weary way home from fraudulent displays of purgatorial suffering, carrying with them the bitter taste of spiritual deception, the foundations of an even greater betrayal were already being laid in the corridors of power across Europe. The story that unfolds next reveals how even the most powerful religious institutions could fall victim to the same forces of greed and political manipulation that preyed upon common believers, though on a scale that would reshape the medieval world itself. In the autumn of 1307, Jacques de Molay stood at the pinnacle of medieval power, commanding an organization that owned more land than most kings and possessed wealth that made entire nations envious. As Grand Master of the Knights Templar, he controlled a military and financial empire that stretched from the misty shores of Scotland to the sun-baked stones of the Holy Land. Yet within months, he would find himself chained in a dungeon, facing accusations that would destroy not only his life, but the very order he had devoted his existence to building and defending. The irony was profound and bitter. Here was a man who had spent decades fighting to protect Christian pilgrims from the very exploitation our previous travelers experienced, yet he would ultimately fall victim to a deception far more sophisticated and devastating than any staged display of purgatorial souls. His story illuminates the dangerous intersection where spiritual authority meets temporal power, where vast wealth becomes its own enemy, and where loyalty to ideals can lead to destruction by those who claim to share them. Jacques de Molay's story begins not in the halls of power, but in the rolling hills of Burgundy, where he was born around 1243 into a family of minor nobility whose fortunes had seen better days. The Molay family held modest lands near Vitry-sur-Orge, estates that provided enough to maintain their status, but not enough to secure their future in an increasingly competitive world. Young Jacques would have grown up understanding both the privileges and limitations of his station, comfortable enough to receive education and training in arms, yet humble enough to know that his advancement would depend on merit rather than inheritance. The world that shaped de Molay's youth was one of intense religious fervor and military ambition, where the line between spiritual devotion and worldly glory blurred in ways that seemed strange to modern eyes. The Crusades had been raging for over a century, and tales of Christian warriors fighting to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control filled the air of every noble household. These weren't distant stories, but immediate realities that shaped career choices and family fortunes. The Knights Templar, officially known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, represented the perfect fusion of these two driving forces, religious devotion and martial prowess combined in service to what seemed an unquestionably righteous cause. When Jacques de Molay joined the Templars around 1265, he entered an organization unlike anything else in medieval Europe, an institution that had evolved far beyond its founders' simple intentions. The Templars had been created in 1119 with a straightforward mission: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem through territories where bandits and hostile forces posed constant threats. But by the time de Molay took his vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they had evolved into something far more complex and powerful than their founders could have imagined. They were simultaneously monks and soldiers, bankers and diplomats, landowners and international traders. Their distinctive white mantles marked with red crosses were recognized from London to Constantinople, and their word carried weight in royal courts and merchant exchanges alike. They had created what amounted to medieval Europe's first multinational corporation, complete with sophisticated management structures, standardized procedures, and financial innovations that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. The young knight's early years in the order remain largely mysterious, shrouded in the same secrecy that would eventually contribute to the Templars' downfall. What we know is that he showed exceptional dedication and leadership skills, rising through the ranks with unusual speed, even in an organization that prized merit over birth. He served in the Holy Land during some of the most challenging years of the crusading period, witnessing firsthand the gradual erosion of Christian control over the territories his order had been created to protect. These were years of constant warfare, diplomatic intrigue, and growing recognition that the crusading ideal was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. The Muslim forces under leaders like Saladin had proven far more capable and resilient than early crusaders had expected, and the cost of maintaining Christian footholds in the region was growing beyond what European resources could reasonably support. De Molay would have learned hard lessons about the reality of warfare, the complexity of international politics, and the challenge of maintaining idealistic goals in an increasingly pragmatic world. By the 1290s, de Molay had been elected Grand Master, making him the supreme leader of an organization that had become Europe's first truly international corporation. The position carried responsibilities that would challenge any modern CEO, managing vast estates across multiple countries, coordinating military operations in distant territories, maintaining diplomatic relationships with rulers who were sometimes allies and sometimes enemies, often within the same year. The Templars owned vast estates across France, England, Spain, Portugal, and Germany, properties that generated income through agriculture, manufacturing, and trade. Their fortified commanderies served as banks where pilgrims could deposit money in one location and withdraw it in another, a service that required sophisticated accounting systems and international communication networks centuries before such services became common in civilian commerce. They had developed their own fleet of ships for both military and commercial purposes, and their financial innovations included early forms of international banking that laid groundwork for practices still used today. The order's wealth was legendary and often exaggerated by both admirers and critics, but the reality was impressive enough to justify the attention it received. They received donations from kings and peasants alike, accumulated land through careful management and strategic purchases, and charged interest on loans despite church prohibitions on usury, a practice they justified through creative interpretations of canon law that would have impressed any modern financial lawyer. Their London temples served as England's treasury, while their Paris stronghold held the French crown jewels. They had essentially created medieval Europe's most sophisticated banking system, all while maintaining their identity as warrior monks devoted to spiritual as well as temporal service. De Molay's leadership style reflected both the opportunities and challenges of commanding such an organization. He was known for his personal piety and austerity, sleeping on simple bedding and eating modest meals even as he controlled unimaginable wealth. Contemporary accounts describe him as tall and dignified, with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, but also the humility of someone who had never forgotten his religious vows. Yet he also demonstrated the political acumen necessary to navigate relationships with kings, popes, and rival military orders in an era when a wrong diplomatic decision could have catastrophic consequences. He understood that the Templars' power made them both indispensable and threatening to secular authorities. Their wealth allowed them to fund military campaigns that cash-strapped monarchs couldn't afford, but it also made them potential rivals to royal authority. Their international connections provided valuable intelligence and diplomatic services, but also created suspicions about where their ultimate loyalties lay. De Molay walked a careful line between asserting the order's independence and maintaining the political relationships necessary for its survival. The Grand Master's greatest challenge came from an unexpected source: the very success of his order. By the early 14th century, the Crusades had effectively ended with Christian forces expelled from their last major stronghold in the Holy Land. The fall of Acre in 1291 had marked the end of nearly 2 centuries of crusading effort, leaving the military orders without their original purpose while they retained all the wealth and power they had accumulated in service to that now obsolete mission. This created a dangerous situation where organizations like the Templars possessed enormous resources but lacked a clear justification for their continued existence that could satisfy critics and rivals. De Molay proposed new crusades and alternative missions, but these plans seemed increasingly unrealistic as European politics shifted toward national concerns rather than international religious warfare. The Templars found themselves in the position of a powerful solution looking for a problem that no longer existed. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, became increasingly resentful of the Templars' independence and wealth as his own financial situation deteriorated. France was deeply in debt, partly due to expensive wars with England and partly due to Philip's ambitious but costly domestic programs. The king had already demonstrated his willingness to attack traditional sources of authority by briefly arresting Pope Boniface VIII in a dispute over papal versus royal power. The Templars represented an even more attractive target. They possessed vast wealth within French territory, but owed allegiance to no secular authority. Philip's campaign against the Templars began years before the dramatic arrests that would destroy them, revealing a level of planning and preparation that demonstrated both his political sophistication and his ruthless determination. He planted spies within the order, collected gossip and rumors about their secret rituals, and gradually built a legal case based on accusations of heresy, blasphemy, and various forms of corruption. The charges were carefully crafted to be both shocking enough to justify extreme measures and plausible enough to convince those who wanted to believe them. The accusations were lurid and designed to shock medieval sensibilities: denial of Christ during secret initiation ceremonies, worshipping a mysterious idol called Baphomet, ritual homosexuality among the brothers, and spitting on the cross as part of their religious practices. These charges played on existing suspicions about the Templars' secrecy while tapping into medieval fears about heretical practices that threatened the foundations of Christian society. De Molay initially dismissed these rumors as the predictable slanders that powerful organizations always attracted from envious or hostile sources. He had faced criticism before and understood that the Templars' wealth and necessarily secretive military operations naturally bred suspicion and resentment among those who lacked access to the order's inner workings. What he failed to recognize was the systematic nature of Philip's campaign and the king's determination to destroy the order entirely rather than simply reform it or extract concessions from it. The end came with shocking suddenness on Friday, October 13th, 1307. A date that some historians claim gave rise to the enduring superstition about Friday the 13th being unlucky. Acting on secret orders distributed in sealed packets with instructions not to open them until the designated moment, French officials simultaneously arrested Templars throughout France, including de Molay himself. The coordination was remarkable, demonstrating a level of administrative efficiency that the medieval state rarely achieved and suggesting extensive preparation for an operation of unprecedented scope. Hundreds of knights who had gone to sleep as members of Christendom's most powerful military order woke up as prisoners accused of the most heinous crimes imaginable. The psychological impact was devastating. Men who had devoted their lives to defending Christian ideals found themselves branded as enemies of everything they had sworn to protect. The speed and completeness of the operation left no time for organized resistance or appeals to higher authorities. De Molay found himself chained in the dungeons beneath the temple in Paris, the very stronghold that had symbolized his order's power and independence. The irony was bitter beyond measure. The Grand Master, who had controlled vast wealth and commanded thousands of knights across Europe, was now a prisoner in his own headquarters, dependent on his captors for basic necessities like food and water. The chambers that had once hosted meetings with kings and princes now served as cells for men awaiting interrogation on charges that could result in death by burning. The interrogations began immediately, and they reveal both the sophisticated nature of Philip's preparation and the psychological pressure brought to bear on the prisoners. The questioning wasn't random or improvised. It followed carefully prepared scripts designed to extract specific confessions that would justify the order's dissolution and the seizure of its assets. The interrogators demonstrated detailed knowledge of Templar practices and procedures, suggesting that Philip's spies had been gathering intelligence for years before the arrests were made. Under torture and the threat of execution, de Molay initially confessed to some of the charges against the order. This moment represents one of the most controversial and debated aspects of his story. Historians continue to argue about whether his confession reflected genuine guilt, strategic calculation designed to protect his fellow Templars, or simply the inevitable result of unbearable pressure applied by experts in extracting confessions from unwilling subjects. The techniques used against Templar prisoners were brutal even by medieval standards, which tolerated levels of judicial violence that modern legal systems would consider unconscionable. These included prolonged isolation designed to break down psychological resistance, deliberate starvation to weaken physical and mental defenses, and various forms of physical torture applied with the systematic precision of men experienced in breaking human will. The goal wasn't simply to punish, but to extract confessions that would provide legal justification for predetermined political decisions. However, de Molay later recanted his confession, claiming it had been extracted under duress and did not represent the truth about either his own conduct or the practices of his order. This recantation was not only personally courageous, but also strategically crucial. It provided legal grounds for challenging the entire proceeding and questioning the validity of confessions obtained from other Templar prisoners under similar circumstances. The Grand Master's decision to withdraw his confession demonstrated remarkable moral courage, as it virtually guaranteed his eventual execution while offering little hope of practical benefit. The legal proceedings that followed stretched over 7 years, revealing the complex political dynamics that surrounded the Templars' destruction and the difficulties involved in eliminating an international organization with powerful connections throughout Europe. Pope Clement V, though officially supportive of Philip's actions, was clearly uncomfortable with the precedent being set by a secular ruler taking such dramatic action against a religious order without clear papal authorization. Other European monarchs were similarly conflicted. They envied Philip's seizure of Templar wealth, but worried about the implications for their own relationships with religious institutions. During these years of imprisonment and legal maneuvering, de Molay remained active in defending his order's reputation and fighting for its survival. He wrote letters to other European leaders appealing for support, composed treatises defending Templar practices against the charges brought against them, and maintained correspondence with surviving members of his order who had escaped arrest or been released. These documents reveal a man who understood that his own fate was probably sealed, but hoped to preserve something of what the Templars had represented and accomplished. The Grand Master's defense strategy was sophisticated and demonstrated his deep understanding of both canon law and international politics. He challenged the legal jurisdiction of the French courts, arguing that only the Pope had authority to judge a religious order. He systematically refuted the specific charges brought against the Templars, pointing out inconsistencies in witness testimony and highlighting the obvious political motivations behind the prosecution. He demonstrated detailed knowledge of canonical procedures and legal precedents that surprised his interrogators and suggested extensive preparation for the defense of his order. Perhaps most effectively, de Molay argued that the Templars' secrecy had been necessitated by their military mission rather than used to conceal heretical wrongdoing. The order's initiation rituals, he explained, had been designed to test candidates' dedication and loyalty under extreme conditions, not to promote beliefs contrary to Christian doctrine. The financial practices that critics characterized as greedy were actually sophisticated attempts to fund ongoing military operations in challenging circumstances where traditional sources of support had proven inadequate. As the years passed, it became increasingly clear that Philip's primary goal was not reforming the Templars or addressing legitimate concerns about their practices, but destroying them entirely and seizing their assets for his own use. Templar properties throughout Europe were gradually absorbed by rival military orders or national treasuries, while the leadership remained imprisoned pending final judgment that seemed designed to be delayed indefinitely. The order's sophisticated financial and administrative systems were systematically dismantled, and its international network of communication and trade was broken apart and distributed among Philip's allies. The final act of de Molay's drama played out on March 18, 1314, on a small island in the Seine River called Isle aux Juifs. A commission of cardinals had sentenced him and 3 other Templar leaders to life imprisonment, expecting them to accept this verdict quietly and disappear into obscurity while the order's remaining assets were distributed according to Philip's wishes. Instead, de Molay and Geoffroy de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy, made a decision that transformed them from defeated prisoners into historical martyrs. They publicly recanted their confessions and proclaimed the innocence of their order before a crowd that had gathered to witness what was expected to be a routine administrative conclusion to a long legal process. This defiant act was unprecedented and caught Philip's officials completely unprepared. By the laws governing heresy trials, relapsed heretics, those who returned to condemned beliefs after confessing, faced immediate execution without possibility of appeal or further legal review. This final moment of defiance sealed their fate, but also secured their legacy. According to French law and established church practice, Philip IV had no choice but to order their immediate burning at the stake, though he chose to proceed without waiting for papal approval or conducting the additional legal review that such a dramatic change in circumstances might normally have required. The king's haste in ordering the execution suggested either confidence in the righteousness of his cause or eagerness to end a proceeding that had dragged on far longer than originally anticipated. Contemporary accounts of the execution described de Molay's remarkable composure in his final hours, behavior that impressed even those who had participated in his persecution. Despite years of imprisonment, physical hardship, and the certainty of an agonizing death, he maintained his dignity and used his last public appearance to deliver a powerful defense of the Templar order that resonated far beyond the immediate audience. He declared that the accusations against the Templars were false, that their persecution was motivated by greed rather than religious conviction, and that his own sufferings were insignificant compared to the injustice done to his fellow knights. The Grand Master's final words, according to several chroniclers who witnessed the execution or spoke to those who did, included a prophetic curse upon those responsible for the order's destruction. He supposedly called upon God to judge Philip IV and Pope Clement V within a year, and both men did indeed die within months of the execution. Philip in November 1314 and Clement in April 1314. While this was likely coincidental, the apparent fulfillment of de Molay's curse contributed to the legend that grew up around his martyrdom and enhanced his reputation as a man wronged by corrupt earthly authorities but vindicated by divine justice. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay on that March evening in 1314 marked the end of one of medieval Europe's most powerful and influential organizations, but they also marked the beginning of a different kind of legacy that would prove more enduring than the temporal power the Templars had accumulated. The Knights Templar, who had once controlled vast wealth and commanded international respect, were officially dissolved by papal decree in 1312. Their assets were supposedly transferred to rival military orders, though much of their wealth found its way into royal treasuries, and their members were scattered or absorbed into other religious communities. Yet de Molay's death also created a powerful narrative of injustice that resonated far beyond the immediate political context of early 14th century Europe. The circumstances of the Templars' destruction, the secret arrests, the torture-induced confessions, the seizure of assets by secular authorities, the violation of traditional legal procedures, created a story that seemed to embody resistance to tyrannical authority and the corruption of justice by political expediency. The mystery surrounding Templar practices and beliefs, combined with the dramatic nature of their fall, ensured that they would live on in popular imagination long after their historical reality had ended. Stories of hidden treasures, secret knowledge, and surviving members plotting revenge became staples of European folklore and literature. These legends were often historically inaccurate and reflected more about the societies that created them than about the actual Templars, but they demonstrated genuine popular sympathy for the order and suspicion about the motives behind their persecution. Modern historians continue to debate the truth behind the charges against the Templars and the motivations of those who destroyed them. Some argue that the order had indeed become corrupted by wealth and power, losing sight of its original spiritual mission in favor of temporal advancement. Others see them as victims of political opportunism and religious manipulation, destroyed not because of their failures, but because of their success in creating an alternative power structure that threatened established authorities. What remains clear is that Jacques de Molay faced his final trial with remarkable courage, choosing death over the compromise of his principles even when such compromise might have saved his life and allowed him to continue serving his order in some diminished capacity. His decision to recant his forced confession and die proclaiming his order's innocence transformed him from a failed leader into a powerful symbol of principled resistance to injustice. The Grand Master's story illuminates the complex relationships between religious authority, political power, and economic influence that characterized medieval Europe and continue to shape our world today. His rise from minor Burgundian nobility to international leadership demonstrates the opportunities available to those who combined military skill with administrative talent and religious dedication. His fall reveals the vulnerability of even the most powerful institutions when they conflict with royal authority backed by popular suspicion and legal manipulation. Jacques de Molay died as he had lived, committed to an ideal that transcended personal interest and immediate political calculation. Whether that ideal was worth the enormous human and institutional cost of defending it remains a question that each observer must answer according to their own values and understanding of history. What cannot be disputed is that his final choice to recant his forced confession and die proclaiming his order's innocence transformed him from a defeated leader into an enduring symbol of resistance to the corruption of justice by political power. As the ashes of Jacques de Molay cooled on that small island in the Seine, and as the once mighty Templar order dissolved into legend and whispered conspiracy, the medieval world continued to reveal its capacity for phenomena that challenged every assumption about human nature and the boundaries of possibility. 2 centuries after the Grand Master's defiant final words, in a prosperous city not far from where his order had met its end, something extraordinary and deeply unsettling began to unfold, an event so strange that contemporary observers struggled to find words adequate to describe it. In July 1518, something began in the streets of Strasbourg, a prosperous city in the Holy Roman Empire, that would challenge everything medieval society thought it knew about the human body, mind, and spirit. What started with one woman dancing alone in a narrow street would, within weeks, consume hundreds of people in an unstoppable frenzy of movement that baffled physicians, terrified clergy, and revealed the mysterious connections between individual psychology and collective behavior in ways that seem almost impossible to modern understanding. City officials found themselves responsible for maintaining order in a community where a growing portion of the population had lost control of their basic physical functions, creating practical challenges that were as immediate as they were unprecedented. Provisions had to be made for feeding and caring for people who couldn't stop moving long enough to attend to their own basic needs, while also managing the crowds of observers who gathered to witness what many considered a supernatural spectacle. The dancers themselves presented a heartbreaking sight that contemporary chroniclers struggled to describe adequately, finding their normal vocabulary insufficient for capturing the reality of what they witnessed. Most were unable to speak coherently while dancing, though they sometimes cried out in apparent distress or made sounds that witnesses interpreted as prayers or pleas for help. Their movements varied from person to person but shared certain characteristics: rapid, repetitive steps that seemed to follow no recognizable pattern, wild arm gestures that appeared disconnected from any conscious intention, and an overall frenzied quality that suggested extreme physical and emotional disturbance. As the plague continued to spread, reaching an estimated 400 active dancers by mid-August, physicians and city officials implemented increasingly desperate measures based on their limited understanding of what might be causing the phenomenon. They commissioned musicians to play continuously in the affected areas, operating under the theory that providing proper musical accompaniment might help the dancers achieve some kind of resolution or exhaustion that would end their affliction. Professional musicians were hired to maintain constant performances in the streets, creating a surreal atmosphere where the city's soundtrack became an endless, desperate attempt at therapeutic intervention. The decision to encourage rather than discourage the dancing reflected medieval medical theories about the importance of allowing bodily humors to achieve natural balance through the completion of whatever process had begun within the afflicted individuals. Physicians reasoned that since the dancers seemed compelled to move, preventing them from doing so might cause even greater harm by trapping corrupted influences within their bodies. This approach, while well-intentioned and logical within the medical framework of the time, likely prolonged and intensified the outbreak by providing social sanction for the afflicted behavior. The dancing stages that were constructed in public squares created focal points for the phenomenon that may have inadvertently encouraged its spread by concentrating attention on the afflicted individuals. These platforms, built ostensibly to contain and organize the dancers for their own safety, became theaters where the affliction was displayed to growing crowds of observers. The spectacle attracted visitors from surrounding areas, some of whom subsequently developed dancing symptoms themselves, suggesting that exposure to the phenomenon could trigger susceptibility in predisposed individuals. Medical chroniclers of the time recorded detailed observations of the dancers' physical condition as the weeks progressed, creating a record that provides modern researchers with valuable insight into the progression of the phenomenon. Many showed signs of severe dehydration, exhaustion, and malnutrition, as they seemed unable to stop moving long enough to consume adequate food or water. Some dancers collapsed from exhaustion but resumed their movements after brief periods of unconsciousness, as if the compulsion operated even when normal consciousness was suspended. Others developed injuries from their constant motion, bleeding feet torn by rough stones, strained muscles pushed beyond their limits, and wounds from falling or colliding with obstacles while in their frenzied state. The most disturbing aspect of the plague, according to contemporary accounts, was the apparent suffering of those affected. Unlike modern therapeutic dance or ecstatic religious experiences that might produce similar physical movements, the Strasbourg dancing appeared to cause genuine distress to its victims rather than providing any form of relief or transcendence. Witnesses described seeing tears streaming down dancers' faces, hearing cries of pain and exhaustion that suggested awareness of their situation despite inability to control it, and observing desperate attempts by some afflicted individuals to restrain their own movements by grasping onto fixed objects or asking others to hold them still. These attempts at self-restraint rarely succeeded for long, as the compulsion to dance seemed to overwhelm conscious intention with remarkable persistence, breaking through physical restraints and social pressure with a force that astonished observers. Family members who tried to forcibly stop their relatives from dancing often found themselves either ignored completely or, in some cases, accidentally injured by the dancers' uncontrolled movements. The affliction seemed to create a barrier between the dancers and the normal world around them, making meaningful communication or intervention almost impossible despite the obvious distress of all involved. The social and economic disruption caused by the dancing plague extended far beyond the immediate medical crisis, creating ripple effects that touched every aspect of life in Strasbourg. The city's economy suffered as traders avoided a location that seemed cursed or contaminated, workers abandoned their posts to care for afflicted family members, and normal commercial activities became impossible in areas where large groups of dancers congregated. The city's reputation suffered throughout the region, with neighboring communities viewing Strasbourg as the victim of some spiritual corruption that might spread to their own territories. Religious interpretations of the plague evolved as it continued without obvious resolution, moving from simple explanations of individual sin to more complex theological theories about collective punishment or divine testing. The phenomenon that historians would later call the dancing plague of Strasbourg represents one of history's most puzzling episodes of mass behavior, an event that sits uncomfortably between medical mystery and cultural revelation. Unlike the calculated deceptions of fraudulent purgatory displays or the political machinations that destroyed the Templars, the dancing plague emerged from sources that remain largely inexplicable even today, demonstrating how the medieval world could produce genuine mysteries alongside its more comprehensible cruelties and corruptions. The story begins with Frau Trophia, a middle-aged woman whose identity remains partially shrouded in historical mystery, though her actions would mark the beginning of one of the strangest episodes in European history. On a warm summer day in July 1518, she stepped into the street outside her home and began to dance. This wasn't the joyful dancing of festivals or celebrations that marked seasonal observances, nor the structured movements of court entertainment that the wealthy enjoyed. Witnesses described her motion as frantic, desperate, and seemingly involuntary, as if some invisible force had seized control of her limbs and refused to let them rest. What made Frau Trophia's dancing immediately disturbing to those who observed it wasn't just its strange character, but its relentless duration. She danced through the afternoon heat, continued as evening shadows fell across the cobblestones and showed no signs of stopping as darkness settled over the city. Neighbors who initially watched with the curiosity that unusual events naturally attract grew concerned as hours passed, and the woman seemed unable to cease her movements despite obvious exhaustion, distress, and the natural human need for rest and sustenance. By the second day, Frau Trophia was still dancing, her clothes torn and soaked with perspiration, her feet bleeding from constant contact with the rough cobblestones that paved the medieval streets. Local authorities and physicians were summoned to examine this unprecedented situation, hoping to find some explanation in their understanding of medicine, law, or divine intervention. They found a woman who appeared to be in the grip of something beyond normal human experience. Her eyes rolled back, her movements increasingly frantic and uncontrolled, her body pushed far beyond the limits of normal endurance. The medical understanding of the early 16th century provided no framework for comprehending such behavior, leaving learned men groping for explanations and theories that seemed primitive to modern observers but represented the best knowledge available to medieval practitioners. Physicians trained in the humoral theory that dominated medieval medicine searched for signs of imbalanced bodily fluids or corrupted vital spirits that might explain the woman's condition. They examined Frau Trophia's pulse, studied her urine for telltale signs of internal disruption, and attempted to determine whether her condition resulted from an excess of hot or cold humors within her system. Religious authorities initially suspected demonic possession or divine punishment for hidden sins, explanations that fit comfortably within medieval understanding of supernatural intervention in human affairs. The involuntary nature of the dancing, combined with the woman's apparent inability to control her actions through conscious will, matched established patterns of supernatural influence that clergy had been trained to recognize and combat. Priests were called to perform exorcisms and bless the afflicted woman with holy water and sacred oils, while concerned citizens speculated about what terrible transgression might have brought such a visible curse upon their community. However, the situation grew far more complex and frightening when, on the third day, other people began exhibiting identical symptoms without any obvious connection to Frau Trophia's original affliction. A neighbor started dancing uncontrollably in her own doorway, her movements mirroring the frantic quality that had characterized the first case. By evening, several more residents had joined the growing group of dancers, each displaying the same relentless, involuntary movements that seemed to operate independently of their conscious will or desire. The spread of the dancing plague followed patterns that modern observers might recognize as characteristic of mass psychogenic illness, though no such concept existed in 1518 to help medieval authorities understand what they were witnessing. The affliction seemed to pass most readily between people who knew each other personally or who spent extended time observing the dancers, suggesting some form of psychological contagion that operated below the level of conscious awareness. Women appeared more susceptible than men, and individuals already suffering from stress, poverty, or social isolation seemed particularly vulnerable to whatever force was spreading through the community. Within a week, dozens of people were dancing day and night in Strasbourg's streets and squares, creating a surreal atmosphere that disrupted the normal rhythms of urban life. The city's established patterns of commerce, worship, and social interaction were thrown into chaos as families struggled to care for afflicted relatives. Businesses closed when owners or customers joined the dancers, and public spaces became filled with the sounds of shuffling feet, labored breathing, and occasional cries of distress from those trapped in the compulsive movement. The local authorities faced an unprecedented crisis that defied all conventional responses and challenged their understanding of how human societies functioned. Traditional punishments were meaningless against an affliction that appeared to be involuntary, making it impossible to apply normal standards of legal responsibility. Medical treatments proved ineffective, and religious interventions seemed to have no impact on the dancer's condition, leaving both secular and spiritual authorities without clear guidance about how to respond to a situation that fit no existing categories of understanding. Initial theories about demonic possession or punishment for hidden sins gave way to broader explanations involving community-wide moral failings that required collective response. priests organized public prayers, processions, and acts of communal penance designed to address whatever divine displeasure might be causing the affliction, though these efforts seemed to have little effect on the dancers themselves. The involvement of Saint Vitus in contemporary explanations of the plague reflects the medieval tendency to associate mysterious illnesses with specific saints who were believed to have power over particular types of affliction. Saint Vitus was traditionally invoked against epilepsy, chorea, and other disorders involving involuntary movement, making him an obvious choice for intercession against the dancing plague. Pilgrimages to shrines dedicated to Saint Vitus became popular among families of the afflicted, though these journeys often proved dangerous for dancers who were physically weakened by weeks of constant movement. Some of the most intriguing historical evidence about the Strasbourg dancing plague comes from administrative records that document the city government's practical response to the crisis. These documents reveal the mundane challenges faced by authorities trying to maintain basic civic functions, while caring for hundreds of people who had lost control of their motor functions. Detailed accounts exist of expenditures for food, medical care, and crowd control, creating a paper trail that helps modern researchers understand both the scope of the phenomenon and the community's response to it. The role of suggestion and social contagion in spreading the dancing plague becomes more apparent when examining the pattern of its eventual resolution, which occurred as mysteriously as its beginning but followed changes in the community's approach to managing the crisis. The phenomenon began to decline in early September, roughly coinciding with several important shifts in how the city responded to the outbreak. Musicians were dismissed, the dancing stages were dismantled, and afflicted individuals were taken to religious shrines outside the city for treatment through prayer and isolation from other dancers. This shift in approach, from encouraging the dancing through musical accompaniment to removing dancers from public view, may have been crucial in breaking the cycle of social contagion that sustained the plague. Without the reinforcement provided by observing others in similar states, and removed from the environment where the affliction had first appeared, many dancers gradually regained control of their movements and returned to something approaching normal behavior. However, the recovery process was often slow and incomplete, suggesting that whatever had caused the dancing had created lasting effects that persisted long after the acute phase of the outbreak ended. Some former dancers continued to experience periodic episodes of uncontrollable movement for months or even years after the main outbreak ended, indicating that the phenomenon had created lasting changes in their neurological or psychological functioning. Others seemed to recover fully from the physical symptoms, but remained psychologically traumatized by their experience of losing control over their own bodies, a violation of personal autonomy that challenged their understanding of selfhood and free will. A few individuals never fully recovered, either dying from exhaustion during the acute phase of the plague or continuing to suffer from movement disorders that persisted long after the community-wide crisis had passed. These tragic cases served as lasting reminders of the power and mystery of what had occurred, preventing the community from simply forgetting the episode as an aberration that could be safely ignored. The Strasbourg dancing plague was not an isolated incident in medieval European history, though it was the most extensively documented and largest outbreak of its kind. Similar events occurred in other locations and time periods, creating a pattern that helps modern researchers understand the cultural and psychological factors that may have contributed to such phenomena. These related incidents included smaller outbreaks of compulsive dancing in Germany, the Netherlands, and other parts of the Holy Roman Empire, though none matched the scale or duration of the Strasbourg event. Environmental factors may have played a significant role in creating conditions conducive to the dancing plague, contributing to a social atmosphere where unusual behaviors could spread more rapidly than normal. The summer of 1518 was marked by extreme weather patterns, crop failures, and widespread social stress throughout the region. Economic hardship, religious tension related to the growing Protestant Reformation, and political uncertainty created a population already under significant psychological strain. In such circumstances, unusual behaviors that might normally be quickly suppressed or dismissed could potentially find fertile ground for rapid spread through communities where normal social controls had been weakened. The gender distribution of the dancing plague, with women comprising a large majority of those affected, reflects broader patterns in medieval society regarding female social roles and the limited outlets available for expressing psychological distress. Women in early 16th century Strasbourg faced significant constraints on their behavior and had few socially acceptable ways of expressing dissatisfaction with their circumstances or rebelling against social expectations. The dancing plague may have provided a form of temporary escape from these restrictions, though at enormous physical and psychological cost that hardly represented genuine liberation. Modern medical and psychological theories about the dancing plague have evolved considerably since the incident was first studied scientifically in the 19th and 20th centuries. Early explanations focused on ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, but this theory has been largely abandoned due to the specific symptoms exhibited by the dancers and the pattern of the outbreak spread. Ergot poisoning would have affected entire households that shared contaminated food, but the dancing plague showed clear patterns of social transmission that suggested psychological rather than purely biological causation. Contemporary understanding emphasizes psychosocial factors, including mass psychogenic illness, conversion disorder, and the role of cultural beliefs in shaping physical symptoms. These explanations suggest that the dancing plague represented a form of collective psychological response to social stress, channeled through cultural expectations about supernatural intervention and expressed through physical symptoms that felt completely real to those experiencing them. The dancing plague also illustrates the limitations of medieval medical knowledge and the sometimes counterproductive nature of well-intentioned treatments based on incomplete understanding. The decision to provide musical accompaniment and encourage continued dancing, while logical within the medical framework of the time, likely prolonged and intensified the outbreak by providing social validation for the afflicted behavior. This highlights the importance of understanding how cultural beliefs about illness and appropriate treatment can influence both the course of an epidemic and its eventual resolution. Perhaps most significantly, the Strasbourg dancing plague demonstrates the powerful influence of social and psychological factors on physical health and behavior, revealing connections between mind and body that medieval medicine was only beginning to recognize. The rapid spread of identical symptoms among people who had no direct physical contact with each other suggests mechanisms of influence that operate below the level of conscious decision-making, challenging assumptions about individual autonomy and the boundaries between self and society. The aftermath of the dancing plague left Strasbourg forever changed, not only in terms of its immediate population, but in the collective memory and cultural understanding of what the human body and mind were capable of experiencing under extreme circumstances. Families who had watched their loved ones dance themselves to the brink of death struggled to make sense of what they had witnessed, searching for explanations that could restore their confidence in the predictability and controllability of human behavior. The medical establishment, having failed so completely to understand or effectively treat the condition, was forced to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the relationship between mind, body, and spirit. The dancing plague had demonstrated that the boundaries between these categories were far more fluid and permeable than traditional medical theory suggested, opening questions that would not be adequately addressed for centuries. Documentation from the months following the plague reveals a community grappling with profound questions about the nature of human consciousness, free will, and social cohesion. Church records show increased confessions and requests for spiritual guidance, suggesting that many residents questioned their own mental stability and feared they might be susceptible to similar afflictions. The plague had demonstrated that the boundary between normal and abnormal behavior was far more fragile than anyone had previously imagined, creating lasting anxiety about the reliability of human nature itself. The economic recovery of Strasbourg took years, as the city had to rebuild not only its practical infrastructure, but also its reputation as a stable trading center where merchants could conduct business without fear of inexplicable disruptions. The dancing plague had created a form of social contamination that persisted long after the last dancer had stopped moving, as stories of the event spread throughout Europe and contributed to Strasbourg's reputation as a place where strange and dangerous things could happen without warning. One of the most fascinating aspects of the historical record involves the attempts by scholars and physicians from across Europe to understand and explain what had occurred in Strasbourg, creating some of the earliest systematic studies of what would later be recognized as mass psychogenic illness. Letters and treatises written in the years following the plague reveal intense intellectual curiosity mixed with genuine fear about the implications of such events for human society. If hundreds of people could simultaneously lose control of their basic motor functions, what did this suggest about the stability of civilization itself? These scholarly investigations produced important groundwork for understanding how psychological distress could manifest in physical symptoms and how social factors could influence individual health and behavior. Though it would be centuries before such insights were formally incorporated into medical theory, the dancing plague forced medieval observers to confront the reality of mind-body connections that their traditional theories could not adequately explain. The religious implications of the dancing plague continued to reverberate throughout the region for decades, contributing to theological debates about the relationship between divine intervention and natural causation. Some saw the event as evidence of God's continuing involvement in human affairs, while others interpreted it as a sign that the natural world contained forces and patterns that human reason had not yet discovered. These discussions contributed to broader questions about the relationship between faith and empirical observation that would eventually influence the development of scientific methodology. Perhaps most remarkably, the Strasbourg dancing plague demonstrated the incredible resilience of human communities faced with seemingly inexplicable crises. Despite the terror and confusion it caused, the city's residents ultimately found ways to care for the afflicted, maintain essential services, and eventually restore normal social functioning. The plague revealed both human vulnerability to forces beyond understanding and human adaptability in the face of unprecedented challenges. The mystery of what exactly triggered the dancing plague in Strasbourg during that hot summer of 1518 may never be fully solved, leaving it as one of history's most intriguing puzzles. However, its legacy extends far beyond the specific medical or psychological mechanisms involved. The event stands as a powerful reminder of the complex interactions between individual psychology, social dynamics, and cultural beliefs that shape human experience in ways we are only beginning to understand, even with the benefit of centuries of additional knowledge and research. As the people of Strasbourg slowly returned to their normal lives, still puzzling over the inexplicable events that had transformed their city into a stage for mass hysteria, the quiet rhythms of medieval religious life continued undisturbed in monasteries across Europe. Yet behind the walls of these supposedly austere institutions, a very different kind of mystery was unfolding, one that revealed the extraordinary gap between public religious ideals and private religious reality. While common believers scraped together copper coins for fraudulent glimpses of purgatory, and while entire communities could be seized by inexplicable dancing frenzies, the highest ranks of medieval religious hierarchy lived in luxury that would have made kings envious and philosophers question the very nature of spiritual authority. The daily life of a powerful abbot in the 14th century reveals a world where spiritual authority translated seamlessly into material abundance, where vows of poverty applied to everyone except those who took them most publicly, and where the management of God's earthly kingdom required comforts that seemed suspiciously similar to those enjoyed by secular nobility. This final chapter in our evening's journey takes us behind carefully guarded monastery walls to discover a realm of hidden luxury that coexisted with the struggles, frauds, and mysteries that defined medieval life for ordinary people. Brother William de Clown, abbot of Leicester, rises each morning not to the harsh clang of chapel bells that wake his monks at dawn, but to the gentle touch of his personal servant, a young man named Thomas whose sole responsibility is attending to the abbot's comfort and daily schedule. The contrast with the common monastic experience begins immediately upon waking, as Thomas draws back heavy tapestries that block drafts from the abbot's private chambers that occupy an entire floor of the monastery's finest tower and contain more luxury than most nobles could afford to maintain. The abbot's bedroom centers around a massive four-poster bed hung with silk curtains imported from Constantinople at considerable expense and stuffed with the finest goose down available in England. The mattress rests on a frame carved from English oak by master craftsmen and decorated with religious scenes that serve the dual purpose of displaying piety and demonstrating wealth. Beside the bed stands a small table holding a silver chalice filled with blessed wine, ostensibly for emergency spiritual purposes, but actually serving as a nighttime comfort for a man who has grown accustomed to the finest vintages that medieval Europe can provide. As Thomas helps the abbot dress for the day ahead, the contrast between his attire and that of common monks becomes immediately apparent to any observer who might witness this private ritual. While regular brothers wear rough woolen habits that scratch against their skin as a deliberate reminder of earthly suffering and the need for spiritual focus, Abbot William's undergarments are made of the finest linen, soft as silk against his well-fed flesh. The fabric has been specially treated and prepared by skilled craftsmen whose techniques are closely guarded trade secrets. His outer robes, though officially identical in design to those worn by his subordinates, are cut from wool so fine it might be mistaken for velvet and dyed with expensive pigments that create deep, rich colors impossible to achieve with common materials. The difference is subtle enough to maintain the appearance of monastic simplicity while providing comfort and luxury that would be immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the finest clothing available to medieval aristocracy. The abbot's private chapel, where he conducts his morning prayers in solitude, contains religious artifacts worth more than most villages see in a decade of agricultural production. The altar is carved from imported marble and inlaid with precious metals that catch the light from dozens of pure beeswax candles, a significant luxury when most people make do with tallow candles that fill their homes with acrid smoke and provide inadequate illumination. The crucifix above the altar is crafted from gold and encrusted with gems that were donated by wealthy patrons seeking spiritual favors, each stone representing prayers bought and paid for rather than earned through genuine devotion or spiritual merit. After private prayers that last precisely long enough to satisfy the requirements of form without interfering with more pressing matters of estate management and political correspondence, Abbot William proceeds to his first meal of the day. The abbot's dining hall occupies a suite of rooms adjacent to his personal quarters, designed to accommodate both intimate meals and formal entertainment of important visitors whose goodwill is essential for protecting the monastery's extensive interests. This morning's breakfast, served on silver plates that gleam in the light from tall windows fitted with actual glass, another extraordinary luxury in an age when most buildings make do with wooden shutters or oiled parchment, would feed a peasant family for a week. The meal begins with fresh bread made from the finest wheat flour, still warm from the monastery's private bakehouse, where skilled bakers work exclusively to supply the abbot's table with delicacies that bear no resemblance to the coarse, dark loaves that sustain common people. This bread is white as snow, soft as cushions, and flavored with honey and spices that arrive via the monastery's extensive trading networks that span from England to the Mediterranean. Butter, churned fresh that morning from the cream of cows that graze on the monastery's richest pastures, melts into the warm bread with a richness that transforms simple ingredients into luxury that rivals anything available at royal courts. Fresh eggs, still warm from hens that roam freely in the abbot's private gardens, are prepared by cooks trained in the finest techniques of food preparation, skills passed down through generations of professional kitchen staff. These aren't the occasional treats that peasants might enjoy during religious festivals if they're particularly fortunate, but daily staples prepared with expertise that would be valued in any noble household. The eggs are accompanied by bacon from pigs raised specifically for the abbot's table, cured with salt and spices that cost more per pound than most people earn in a month of labor. Fruit appears on the abbot's breakfast table even in the depths of winter. Apples and pears stored in special cellars designed to preserve their freshness through careful control of temperature and humidity. Imported oranges that have traveled from distant Mediterranean groves, and exotic delicacies like figs and dates that arrive through trading relationships maintained specifically to supply the monastery's highest-ranking residents. Each piece of fruit represents not only luxury, but power, the ability to command resources from across the known world and deliver them fresh to a single man's table. The abbot's dining experience includes entertainment that would be considered scandalous if provided for anyone of lower spiritual rank. Musicians perform during meals, playing instruments and singing songs that, while not explicitly secular, certainly prioritize beauty and aesthetic pleasure over religious instruction or spiritual edification. The performers are maintained as part of the monastery's household staff, their sole responsibility being the provision of aesthetic pleasure for the abbot and his distinguished guests. After breakfast, Abbot William conducts the business that actually occupies most of his time and attention, the management of vast economic enterprises that generate the wealth supporting his lifestyle and the monastery's operations. The monastery controls thousands of acres of agricultural land, dozens of mills and workshops, extensive trading operations, and complex financial arrangements that extend throughout England and into continental Europe. Managing these assets requires skills more commonly associated with merchant princes than spiritual leaders, and the abbot's daily schedule reflects this economic reality. The abbot's office, located in the monastery's administrative building, resembles the headquarters of a major commercial enterprise more than a religious institution dedicated to spiritual contemplation. Clerks and accountants work at tables covered with ledgers, contracts, and correspondence related to the monastery's business operations. Maps showing the extent of monastic lands cover the walls, marked with symbols indicating mills, quarries, forests, and other revenue-generating assets under the abbot's direct control. The complexity of these operations is staggering even by modern standards. The monastery operates its own sheep farms, producing wool that is sold to textile manufacturers across Europe in transactions that involve sophisticated understanding of international markets and seasonal price fluctuations. It maintains grain storage facilities that allow it to manipulate local food prices by controlling supply during times of shortage, a practice that generates substantial profits while potentially causing hardship for local populations dependent on stable food prices. The monastery runs breweries that produce alesh sold commercially while also supplying the institution's own substantial consumption, and it operates stone quarries that provide building materials for both religious and secular construction projects throughout the region. These enterprises require constant attention to detail, sophisticated accounting practices, and careful management of relationships with customers, suppliers, and competitors. Perhaps most controversially, the monastery engages in money-lending operations that generate substantial profits despite church prohibitions on usury. These loans are carefully structured to avoid technical violations of canon law while still extracting interest payments from borrowers desperate for capital. The abbot personally oversees the most important lending decisions, balancing spiritual concerns against financial opportunities with skills that would impress any professional banker. The abbot's involvement in secular politics requires entertainments and diplomatic activities that blur the line between religious and worldly leadership in ways that would have horrified the monastery's founders. His dining hall regularly hosts elaborate meals for nobles, merchants, and government officials whose goodwill is essential for protecting the monastery's interests. These events feature multi-course feasts prepared by professional chefs and served with wines that cost more per bottle than most people earn in a year of agricultural labor. The guest quarters maintained for important visitors surpass the accommodations available at most royal courts, creating an environment of luxury designed to impress and influence those whose support the monastery requires. Private chambers feature silk hangings imported from distant lands, carpets woven by master craftsmen, and furniture created by artisans whose skills are renowned throughout Europe. Baths can be arranged with heated water perfumed with exotic oils, and personal servants attend to every need of distinguished guests, ensuring that their experience of monastic hospitality creates lasting impressions of wealth and power. The luxury provided serves both genuine hospitality and calculated diplomacy. Visitors leave with impressions of institutional prosperity and sophistication that enhance the monastery's reputation and political influence throughout the region. The abbot understands that maintaining his position requires not only spiritual authority, but also the respect that comes from demonstrating material success and cultural refinement. The abbot's afternoon activities often include hunting expeditions conducted on the monastery's extensive private lands, activities that serve multiple purposes while providing personal pleasure and political advantage. These hunts provide fresh meat for the abbot's table, offer opportunities for informal diplomacy with important guests, and demonstrate the monastery's control over vast territories that extend far beyond the immediate religious buildings. The abbot maintains his own pack of hunting dogs, specially bred and trained animals whose care requires significant expense and expertise. His horses are trained specifically for the chase, and he employs professional huntsmen whose skills ensure successful expeditions that provide both sustenance and entertainment. The hunting equipment used by the abbot rivals that owned by the greatest nobles of the realm, with bows crafted by master bowyers using the finest materials available and decorated with silver and ivory inlays that transform functional weapons into works of art. His hunting attire, while ostensibly modest in keeping with his religious station, is made from the finest materials and tailored to fit perfectly, creating an appearance of understated elegance that actually costs far more than obvious displays of wealth. The abbot has learned that true luxury often lies in the quality of materials and craftsmanship rather than in ostentatious decoration, and his clothing reflects this sophisticated understanding of aristocratic taste. The private gardens surrounding the abbot's residence represent another form of luxury that demonstrates both wealth and power while providing personal pleasure and practical benefits. These gardens contain not only herbs and vegetables for the abbot's table, but also purely decorative plants maintained solely for aesthetic pleasure. Exotic flowers imported from distant lands bloom alongside carefully maintained lawns that require constant attention from skilled gardeners whose expertise is costly to maintain. Fountains and artificial ponds create pleasant sounds and cooling effects during summer months, while providing visual beauty that enhances the abbot's daily environment. Paths paved with expensive stones provide comfortable walking surfaces in all weather, and strategically placed benches offer opportunities for contemplation in surroundings that rival the finest secular gardens of the period. The library maintained for the abbot's personal use contains manuscripts worth more than most noblemen's entire estates, representing both intellectual treasure and enormous financial investment. These books, copied by skilled scribes using the finest parchment available and illuminated with gold leaf and precious pigments, represent months or years of skilled labor by the finest craftsmen available. While the monastery's general library serves the educational needs of the monastic community, the abbot's private collection focuses on works that combine intellectual content with extraordinary beauty, each volume representing both learning and luxury. The abbot's evenings often feature entertainments that would be considered inappropriate for ordinary monks, but are justified as necessary for maintaining relationships with secular authorities whose support is essential for the monastery's continued prosperity. Professional entertainers perform music, poetry, and even dramatic presentations that, while avoiding explicitly secular content, certainly prioritize artistic pleasure over religious instruction. These performances take place in halls designed specifically for such events, with acoustic properties and lighting arrangements that enhance the artistic experience and create appropriate settings for diplomatic entertaining. The wine consumed during these evening entertainments represents perhaps the most obvious contradiction between the abbot's vows and his actual lifestyle. The monastery maintains extensive wine cellars stocked with vintages from across Europe, each bottle representing not only substantial cost, but also sophisticated knowledge of viticulture and storage techniques. The abbot's personal wine steward, a position that exists solely to manage these collections, possesses expertise that would be valuable at any royal court and represents a level of specialization that reflects the serious attention given to this aspect of abbatial luxury. The abbot's personal servants represent a household staff whose size and specialization rivals that maintained by great secular lords, creating a complex hierarchy of service that supports every aspect of his daily life. In addition to Thomas, the personal valet who manages the abbot's clothing and appearance, there are specialized servants responsible for his meals, his horses, his hunting equipment, his books, and his correspondence. Each servant is selected for specific skills and maintained at a level of comfort that ensures loyalty and discretion while creating a buffer zone of privileged individuals around the abbot himself. The sleeping arrangements provided for these servants reveal another layer of the monastery's hierarchical luxury that extends the abbot's privileges to those who serve him most directly. While ordinary monks sleep in dormitories on simple beds with minimal comfort, the abbot's personal staff enjoy private chambers with amenities that surpass what most townspeople can afford. This creates a graduated system of privilege that ensures the abbot's daily interactions are primarily with people who benefit from his continued prosperity and power, reinforcing his authority through carefully managed social relationships. The clothing worn by the abbot's servants, while not ostentatious, is made from materials and with craftsmanship that clearly distinguishes them from ordinary monastery staff. Their better appearance reflects not only their higher status within the religious community, but also the abbot's concern with maintaining an impressive household that enhances his own reputation. Every aspect of the abbot's daily environment is designed to reinforce his authority and demonstrate the prosperity that flows from his spiritual leadership, creating a comprehensive system of luxury that touches every detail of daily life. The financial arrangements that support this lifestyle involve accounting practices that would challenge the most sophisticated commercial enterprises, requiring careful management of multiple revenue streams and expense categories. The monastery maintains separate budgets for religious activities, business operations, charitable obligations, and the abbot's personal expenses, with careful attention to ensuring that each category appears to receive appropriate resources while actually maximizing the funds available for luxury expenditures. The abbot's personal treasury, secured in vaults beneath his residence, contains wealth that exists primarily for his own use and enjoyment, though it is officially held in trust for the religious community. Gold and silver vessels, precious gems, and exotic objects collected from across Europe demonstrate both the extent of the monastery's resources and the abbot's personal taste for beautiful and valuable things. These treasures are available for the abbot's use in ways that make formal distinctions about ownership largely meaningless in practical terms. The contradiction between the abbot's vows of poverty and his actual lifestyle is managed through theological rationalizations that would be impressive if they were not so transparently self-serving. The luxury is justified as necessary for maintaining the dignity of religious office, supporting the monastery's political relationships, and providing appropriate hospitality to important visitors. The abbot's comfort is presented as essential for his ability to focus on spiritual matters without distraction from physical needs, creating a circular argument that transforms personal indulgence into religious necessity. This elaborate lifestyle continues year-round, with seasonal variations that add even more luxury to already comfortable circumstances while ensuring that the abbot never experiences the discomforts that mark the lives of ordinary people. Summer brings fresh fruits and vegetables from the monastery's gardens, along with outdoor entertainments that take advantage of good weather and provide opportunities for display of the monastery's wealth and sophistication. Winter features enhanced comfort through superior heating systems that keep the abbot's quarters warm and pleasant, imported delicacies that provide variety during months when fresh food is scarce for most people, and indoor entertainments that make cold months pleasant rather than merely endurable. The abbot's experience of the changing seasons resembles that of the highest nobility rather than the austere existence supposedly associated with religious life. The stark contrast between the abbot's daily experience and that of ordinary believers who support the monastery through their donations and labor reveals the extent to which medieval religious institutions serve the interests of their leadership rather than their stated spiritual missions. While peasants like our pilgrims from the first segment scraped together coins for indulgences and pilgrimages, confident that their sacrifices would earn spiritual rewards, the recipients of their generosity enjoyed lives of ease and luxury that contradicted every principle they supposedly embodied. The system persisted because it was largely hidden from those who funded it, creating a fundamental deception that paralleled the fraudulent purgatory displays we witnessed earlier. Ordinary believers saw only the public face of monastic life, the prayers, the charitable works, the simple habits worn during religious ceremonies. The private reality of silk undergarments, imported delicacies, and personal servants remained carefully concealed behind monastery walls, known only to those whose own prosperity depended on maintaining the abbot's secrets. This hidden luxury existed alongside the genuine spiritual activities that monasteries conducted, creating a complex institution where authentic religious devotion coexisted with material excess in ways that seem contradictory to modern observers. The same buildings that housed fraudulent displays and luxury chambers also sheltered genuine scholars, provided care for the poor, and preserved knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. The medieval monastery was large enough and complex enough to contain both authentic spirituality and calculated deception, both genuine charity and selfish indulgence. The abbot's daily routine reveals how completely the original ideals of monastic life had been transformed by the practical requirements of managing large institutions in a complex political and economic environment. The simple devotion that had motivated the monastery's founders had evolved into something far more sophisticated and worldly, though it retained enough religious content to maintain its spiritual legitimacy. As we reach the end of our journey through these hidden aspects of medieval life, the abbot's comfortable evening routine provides a fitting conclusion to our exploration of a world where spiritual authority, material wealth, and human nature interacted in ways that seemed both familiar and strange to modern sensibilities. The luxury enjoyed behind monastery walls represents the culmination of tendencies we've observed throughout our evening's journey. The transformation of spiritual promises into commercial opportunities, the vulnerability of idealistic institutions to human greed and ambition, and the persistence of fundamental human desires for comfort, security, and status even within supposedly sacred contexts. The contrast between the abbot's silk-lined comfort and the rough straw mattresses of common pilgrims encapsulates the broader themes that have guided our exploration tonight. Medieval society created elaborate systems of spiritual authority and religious meaning, but these systems were always shaped by the same human motivations that drive behavior in any era. The promise of salvation could be commercialized. The most powerful institutions could be corrupted by success, entire communities could be seized by inexplicable forces, and those who preach poverty could live in luxury, all within a world that nevertheless produced genuine art, authentic devotion, and remarkable human achievements. As the abbot settles into his silk-hung bed, attended by servants and surrounded by luxury that exceeds anything available to the vast majority of his contemporaries, the medieval day draws to a close with the same mixture of contradiction and complexity that has characterized our entire journey. The monastery walls that hide such comfort also protect genuine scholarship. The wealth that supports personal luxury also funds charitable works. And the man who enjoys such privileges also carries real responsibilities for the spiritual and material welfare of hundreds of people. The medieval world, as revealed through these four glimpses into its hidden corners, emerges as neither the simple age of faith that romantic imagination might prefer, nor the uniformly dark period that older historical accounts sometimes suggested. Instead, it appears as a time of extraordinary complexity, where human nature expressed itself through institutions and beliefs that seem foreign to modern experience, but reveal familiar patterns of hope, greed, mystery, and the eternal human struggle to balance idealistic aspirations with practical realities. As our journey through these forgotten corners of medieval life draws to a close, we find ourselves returned to the present moment, to the comfort and safety of our modern evening, carrying with us the voices and stories of people who lived and died centuries before our time. The warmth of your blanket, the soft glow of electric light, the simple certainty that tomorrow will bring another peaceful day. These comforts, which we so easily take for granted, would have seemed miraculous to our medieval ancestors who struggled with cold, darkness, and uncertainty in ways we can barely imagine. Yet in traveling through their world tonight, we've discovered that the distance between past and present is not as great as we might have supposed. The human desires and fears that drove those long-dead pilgrims to purchase tickets to see Purgatory still move people today, though in different forms and through different institutions. The political forces that destroyed Jacques de Molay and his order continue to shape our world, though they operate through different mechanisms and serve different masters. The mysterious social dynamics that produced the dancing plague of Strasbourg still influence human behavior, though we've developed new languages to describe and understand such phenomena. And the contradictions between public ideals and private reality that we witnessed in the abbot's luxurious chambers remain familiar features of human institutions, though they may be hidden behind different walls and justified through different arguments. The medieval world we've explored tonight was neither the simple age of faith that romantic imagination sometimes creates, nor the uniformly dark period that older historical accounts often suggested. Instead, it emerges as a time of extraordinary complexity, where human nature expressed itself through institutions and beliefs that seem foreign to modern experience, but reveal familiar patterns of hope and disappointment, idealism and corruption, community and isolation. The pilgrims who discovered the fraudulent nature of their purgatory tour faced the same challenge that confronts anyone who discovers that cherished beliefs are built on deception: how to maintain faith and hope in a world that sometimes rewards cynicism and exploitation. Jacques de Molay's choice to die rather than compromise his principles speaks to the same moral dilemmas that face anyone who must decide whether ideals are worth personal sacrifice. The dancers of Strasbourg remind us that human consciousness and social behavior remain mysteries that can surprise us even when we think we understand them completely. And the comfortable abbot in his silk-lined chambers represents the eternal human tendency to justify personal advantage through appeals to higher purposes. Perhaps the most important lesson from our medieval journey is that every age contains both profound wisdom and dangerous delusion, authentic spirituality and calculated fraud, genuine community and systematic exploitation. The task of distinguishing between these elements requires the same careful attention and moral courage in our time as it did 7 centuries ago, though the specific forms of deception and the particular challenges of discernment continue to evolve. As you settle more deeply into your comfortable surroundings and allow the stories of these medieval lives to fade gently into the background of consciousness, you might reflect on how fortunate we are to live in an age when fraudulent displays of purgatory would fool few people, when religious and political authority can be questioned without fear of execution, when mass hysteria can be studied and potentially treated rather than simply endured, and when institutional hypocrisy can be exposed and challenged through free communication and democratic processes. Yet this gratitude for modern advantages need not blind us to the genuine achievements of our medieval ancestors. The soaring cathedrals they built, the universities they founded, the artistic masterpieces they created, and the intellectual traditions they preserved and transmitted. Their world contained darkness and light in measures that remind us that every human society faces the same fundamental choice between wisdom and folly, justice and exploitation, community and division. The voices of those medieval people, now silent for centuries, whisper across time with messages that remain relevant to our own struggles and aspirations. They remind us that human nature changes very little across the generations, that the powerful always find ways to exploit the vulnerable, that genuine mystery and inexplicable phenomena continue to challenge our understanding, and that the gap between ideals and reality requires constant vigilance to bridge. As sleep approaches and these medieval stories merge with your own dreams and memories, let them serve as gentle reminders that our modern comforts and freedoms were purchased through the struggles and sacrifices of countless generations who faced their own versions of the same challenges we encounter today. Their stories, preserved through centuries in dusty chronicles and crumbling documents, connect us to the larger human story of which we are all temporary participants. Rest well, knowing that the morning will bring new opportunities to learn from the past, while working to create a future that honors both the achievements and learns from the failures of those who came before us. The medieval world, for all its mysteries and contradictions, its frauds and genuine wonders, continues to speak to anyone willing to listen with patience and humility to the voices of our shared human heritage. Sleep peacefully, carrying with you the wisdom of ages and the hope that human consciousness, in all its complexity and contradiction, continues to seek truth, beauty, and meaning across the centuries that separate us from our ancestors and connect us to the generations yet to come.